Welcome to the Main Stage podcast. I'm joined here today by Chief Justice Edwin Cameron, and it's absolutely fantastic to have him here. We've got Matjiu, our producer. He's in the studio with us as well. And it's just an absolutely fantastic and for me surreal opportunity to have the judge here today. Welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here.
We'll hop straight into it because our time's very limited and I cannot tell you how many South Africans want to hear from someone like you on just such a broad range of topics, especially given the rise to prominence in the public space of more political issues recently. Like, for example, nobody was ever engaged in budget talks with your average citizen, and when they try to push the VAT up, all of a sudden the whole country was engaged. So it's also a very fortuitous time to have you. Let's hop straight into one of the most contentious issues in South Africa at the moment, and that's expropriation without compensation. There are many people, myself included, that believe that the act will actually fail at the constitutional level because there are so many issues. For example, the freedom of association. And again, I'm not a legal expert, but in my mind, I'm not sure how you would break that. Do you have any thoughts on the constitutionality of EWC before it goes through the courts, or any predictions on how it will get turned out or even just watered down?
By EWC, you mean, of course, expropriation without compensation.
Yes.
Let me say this, Aidan, that there are two schools of thought. The one is the school of thought by the Institute of Race Relations and Anthea Jeffrey, Dr. Anthea Jeffrey, who's a very skilled and learned commentator. The other school of thought is Tembeka Ngcukaitobi, SC. And the two schools of thought are that the statute creates a power, but there are inhibitions there. The catchword nowadays is guardrails. There are safeguards. And the other school of thought is this is a dangerous piece of legislation. It's been exploited by Trump, and Trump rightly points to the dangers in it. I'm of the Tembeka Ngcukaitobi school of thought. I think that Tembeka is a very impressive person. On an anecdotal level, he once came to chat in my chambers when I was still in the Constitutional Court, and I formed the opinion then, which I still hold, that he should be Chief Justice one day. I'm not pulling shade on Chief Justice Mandisa Maya.
I think he's a fantastic South African.
He's extraordinary. In fact, you should get him on this podcast.
We've had Ben Winks, his colleague. I'd love to get him on the show. I mean, it would be, again, just for me, a dream come true. Sorry, continue.
No, I will, if on the payment of a suitable fee, I'll write to him.
Thank you. I'll give you a brown envelope a la Louis Myburgh.
Exactly. So Tembeka analyzes it, and it's not a false reassurance, but Tembeka gives to me what is a sound analysis of the act, which is less scary than Anthea Jeffrey gives. So I'm not going to express an opinion on whether it will pass constitutional muster, because I think it would be wrong for me as a former judge of the Constitutional Court to be holding forth on its constitutionality. But what I've just said is about what I will say.
It's interesting that you bring up Anthea Jeffrey. Is it Jeffrey or Jeffries? Jeffrey. I listen to her quite a lot. The same as David Ansara. He's obviously quite a prominent voice in the South African socio-economic landscape. Anthea Jeffrey's principle is that the ANC has always been a communist socialist party, and what they did is they pulled the wool over South Africans' eyes and over the world's eyes, particularly donor parties, saying that they were a free market constitutional state, and in that entire time, they were actually driving over a communist KGB-style agenda. Do you think she's far-fetched in this analysis, or do you think that she's hit the nail on the head?
I love it, Aidan. Can I just say that I have a long-standing personal bond with Anthea, which we won't go into right now on the podcast.
Okay.
I want your viewers and listeners to footnote that for me another time. I'm very fond of Anthea, but I differ profoundly from her on many of her analyses. We meet twice a year, round about my birthday and round about her birthday. which was last month on the 4th of September, and we have profound differences. I do think that her analysis is alarmist. I say that with respect. I simply think that the ANC is a more complex organization than that conspiratorialist approach assumes. And the second thing I'd say is that there appears to be almost no ideological coherence at leadership level in the ANC, which is not reassuring, actually, because with ideological coherence, one can fight against it or name it and confront it. So I don't agree with that. Anthea has some very strong ideological positions.
Very much.
For example, on the causes of the carnage in KwaZulu-Natal in the 1980s and early 1990s, with which I profoundly disagree. But my job, Aidan, is not to sound off on these issues. I've written a book recently with my two co-writers, Rebecca Gore and Suhela Surajpal, about prisons. And I've written about AIDS, and I've just spoken to our producer who's standing there, Ben, about the fact that in 2 weeks' time, I'll be celebrating 28 years of surviving AIDS on antiretrovirals. Yes. And then, of course, I've written about queerness and the Constitution. So I'm reluctant to fight with Anthea on your podcast, even though we fight when we meet twice a year around about our birthdays.
I find Anthea Jeffrey to be the kind of person that's quite gracious. In her style of argument, she's not a Richard Dawkins. She's not highly combative. She kind of lays her argument forward, and you can take it or you can leave it. And I must say, kind of like a Tim Bernguy Toby, I appreciate that. Somebody that lays down a good argument and then they're prepared to step back from it and say, take it as you like it.
Or a so-so argument. Not always a good argument.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's that's, I guess, subjective, whether or not it's a good argument.
That's right.
But to put forward their best argument, I think is a rather better term.
I agree Anthea is not a Richard Dawkins, but I would say she's pretty determined, pretty dogged.
Oh, yes.
Pretty steadfast, pretty persevering. I can't think of other polite adjectives to describe her determination.
She's highly articulate, and it would be very, very difficult to beat her out in a debate, given her depth of knowledge and the strength of the position that she often holds.
Yes. Very tactfully said, and I agree with what you've said.
I do enjoy David and Sarah and what they do at the Institute for Race Relations.
Yes, isn't he head of the Free Market Foundation now? Have I got my names wrong?
I think you actually are correct. Yeah. I actually must be honest, I always get them all confused.
No, but he was at the Institute.
Yes.
And the Institute is now someone else. But David and Sarah, I think, if I'm correct, he's Free Market Foundation.
He's a fantastic South African. He won't get back to any of my emails. I've tried to get him on the show. Shoot the Boer. We're just rifling through these. Sometimes it's going to be like a little bit of a punch in the stomach. They're just going to come out of nowhere.
And may I say that that the Judicial Conduct Committee sanctioned Chief Justice Mogoeng because he strayed into the realm of politics. He did something very ill-advised. He launched into the Israel-Palestinian issue on the side of Israel and said that South Africa should change its foreign policy towards Israel, which I think was blatantly political, and he was forced to apologize. He said, I'm not going to apologize, and then he did in the end. So I'm scared of the Judicial Conduct Committee.
Yes.
But certainly I'm willing to speak about Palestine because there's an International Court of Justice case brought partly by my former mentor at the Centre for Applied Legal Studies, Professor John Dugard, who's been working on the iniquities and the war crimes and violations of international law of the State of Israel for many years, for 40 years. So I have to be guarded in what I say about kill the Boer, about, and I will say something. I will say something on your podcast because I can see you raring to raise that. But I've got to be careful that I don't stray into politics.
That makes complete sense.
Like Chief Justice Mogoeng.
Yes.
And I would apologize if I do stray, but I'm careful.
I'm not even skilled enough in understanding the law. I'm not even sure if I'm asking a political or legal question, so please cut me out if I stray myself. Many people think that the Constitutional Court made...
But why have you run away from Kill the Boer?
It's the same question.
Excellent.
Yeah. So many people think that it was a mistake in the Constitutional Court, that it should have been ruled unconstitutional. Yes. And when I ran it through my very own basic reasonable man test, I thought that if I'd swapped the name out with a different race or maybe creed or culture or whatever it is, that it would be... actually a hate crime. Like if I said that against, the LGBTQ community or
vendor speakers
or Sikhs or something like that, that it wouldn't pass muster. And I was wondering if you could explain to us the court's rationale. If nothing else, why did the court say that this should be allowed when others may not be allowed?
The principal reasoning at appellate level is, of course, the reasoning in the Supreme Court of Appeal. And the reasoning was that this is a historic relic in a way that is being sung for wider political purposes than to ventilate hate or to incite hatred. That's the reasoning. What I will say, and this is being extremely careful, and I will be careful because I will certainly not criticize my colleagues, many of whom I revere, who are still in the Constitutional Court. I will say that it's quite difficult when someone comes to Johannesburg or I travel to explain the difference between the judicial decision that to display the old South African flag is hate speech.
Yes.
But that to sing, because the South African flag is also historical, and to sing Kill the Boer is not hate speech. I will just say that it's difficult to explain and it would appear to be anomalous. I won't go further because I honestly haven't. I'm being slightly evasive, but I'm also truthful that I haven't really sorted that out in my own mind. If I could sort it out, I'll phone you and I'll come back on another podcast.
It's interesting that you raised the old South African flag thing because I still see it flown quite often. Really? I especially see it, people use it as a passive-aggressive image in social media. So, for example, if you very casually stand behind an old South African or in front of an old South African flag, it quite obviously says something about how you view the world. That's my opinion.
So it's like a signal.
Yeah, it doesn't get flagged by algorithms, if that makes any sense. The Facebook isn't tuned in to...
You're not brandishing it.
Yeah, it's just very subtle. I find it to be kind of passive-aggressive. Yeah. I've been into...
Oblique.
Yeah, they just kind of subtly keep it in eyes line. For example, I've been to a couple of old bars in small towns, and you see it's still behind the counter. Okay. I once complained about it. It came to no end.
Well, if depending on the location, that must have been pretty brave. To make a complaint.
Yes. I obviously don't make too much of a human complaint. I don't want to make myself look out to be any kind of social justice warrior. But I have on at least one occasion said to somebody, that's illegal. I think they just laughed. Must have thought I was absolutely out of my mind. I must say,
Aidan, I'm not on any of social media. I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on TikTok.
Your life must be at peace.
Yes, it's at peace, and B, it's more ignorant than you has, because I wouldn't know what you've just been telling me about. That's why I'm professing ignorance, because it's genuine.
Yeah, so for me, social media is one of the biggest forces in constitutional democracy across the world right now. It's a very difficult thing for my generation and older to understand. But the way that it's influencing and impacting and driving democracy, I think we learned for the very, very first time when that Cape Town database organization predicted Donald Trump's first victory based solely on social media data, that we had entered a new age of democracy in relation to just how people can be influenced and impacted on a mass level. We certainly saw it in, for example, the Arab Spring, where the uprising itself was driven by social media networks or on social media networks.
That's why in Cameroon they shut down the internet.
Of course.
When the 92-year-old President Biya sought re-election recently, and his opponent is claiming that the election was rigged, and they've shut down all social media, the incumbent president of 92.
Social media is weapons-based communication networks. It's actually a weapons-grade communication network, most of them. Mm-hmm. And as they grow inside developing markets, they're going to have a compounding impact. Mm-hmm. South Africa is just starting to hit the bottom of that wave, and I certainly think we're going to see, we saw it under Zuma with Bell Pottinger and those kind of
influencers.
Yes, I mean, right now South Africa is being attacked by waves of misinformation campaigns run by micro influencers. So you'll, for example, see a journalist will come out with an article, let's say, for example, on a leader that lives in KwaZulu-Natal, and the next thing you'll see that there's thousands of micro influencers that are out there battling the narrative. Some of them are real and employed people that have 50 accounts open at a time. Others are bots. Yeah. I don't know how we're going to combat this, but it's I would say quite a worrying development in democracy, especially if we have a look at how Trump manipulated the system using those principles.
Are you talking about General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi and the laundry bill? Because I read in one of the sites that I have access to, which is Daily Maverick, that once there was a report that the Political Killings Task Team had a bill for 480,000 for laundry, all of these micro-influencers came out to say, oh, this is predictable and it's sinister. And apparently a lot of those accounts that were attacking the report and giving it a sinister cost were sort of Bell Pottinger type commentators. I don't know myself. That's what I read on Daily Maverick. I'm
not sure about that particular incident, but the prevalence of it in South Africa is so broad now that I could, if I could be honest, I could name 10 instances and cases. And if you contacted somebody like Pauli van Wyk from the Daily Maverick, she would tell you about 1,000 of them. I mean, she's on the receiving end of them all the time. She can just go out on Twitter and she can say that the Earth is round, and
the sky is blue.
And just because of who she is in relation to certain political factions in South Africa, she's immediately on the attack with the bots and the.
She and quite a number of female journalists are often attacked on vile gender-based grounds as well. I know that Karen Morn of a different news site has suffered that as well. And I know that Pauli van Wyk, who's I've never met her, but I read some of her stuff, which seems to me thoroughly researched and enormously courageous. And maybe that's why she's being attacked so much, because of her courage. But I haven't verified what she writes personally, but it's always instanced with facts and figures. So to me, prima facie, to use a legal word, it sounds impressive.
There's definitely been a handful of South Africans like that have gone up against the status quo and been on the absolute receiving end of the worst kinds of campaigns. And what happens is they get attacked holistically. So they find that they're on the receiving end of slap lawsuits. They find that they're on the receiving end of misinformation campaigns. They receive death threats. They find funny cars hanging outside of their homes.
Very scary.
Yeah, I mean,
and SLAP, just for your viewers and listeners, Aidan, is strategic litigation to silence criticism, and it's been shown to be done by major corporations who are fouling the environment or continuing to promote oil or sugar or tobacco, and you criticize them, and there's a SLAP lawsuit.
It's basically the big guy beating the little guy up using the courts and legal procedural route to bankrupt them and humiliate them and make
intimidate them.
Oh, it's I completely understand these people's positions. Mandy Wiener, for example, has been outspoken on these issues for very many years.
On criminal networks.
Not just on criminal networks, but she's always been very outspoken, particularly on the issue of saying, guys, this is what happens to whistleblowers.
Yeah.
Whether it's a male, whether it's a female,
Definitely.
regardless of race, culture, creed, religion. For example, Athol Williams, he obviously has a different demographic profile. He's a fairly big, bold man, not a woman, and he was also on the receiving end of the exact same kind of abuse. I really, really feel for these people, and some of them find it incredibly difficult to talk about these issues. I know that Jacob Zuma and the ANN7 guy, I keep forgetting his
Which
name.
guy?
He was a bit of a dubious journalist. He owned a few newspapers. I want to say,
I hope you're talking about Dr. Iqbal Survey.
that's exactly who I'm talking about.
The guy who was Mandela's personal doctor, but no one ever saw him tending to Mandela.
That guy is...
I might just say that this podcast, and you and Ben, the producer, and I personally might get sued just for saying that no one ever saw. Maybe someone did, so I should apologize. Let me apologize right now. In case someone saw Dr. Survey tending to President Mandela.
I've scuttled around questions around him. I'm very, very nervous around that guy. I know a lot of podcasters.
And no one's allowed to say that there was a shady deal with the Public Investment Corporation about his shares, the IO shares. So let us just pull a dark cloak over that, Aidan, stay on the safe side.
He's a very, very dubious human being, and I hope that he meets a little bit more social resistance in the future. I'll leave that at...
Let's say that the word dubious can be protected comment. Fair comment.
He can take it as he likes. It could be a compliment for all he knows. I might like dubious people. Given your experience in the of the prison systems and your knowledge of the prison systems, I was wondering what you think of the suggestion of reintroducing corporal punishment. My first reaction is that it's an insane idea. It was a mechanism that was used to abuse people. People went over the mark. There was no way to regulate it properly, really. You had the odd sociopath that would slip into the system. And when I heard the justification behind the idea to say that there are young men and women who sometimes sit in South African jails for 5 or 10 years while the justice system slowly grinds away in, frankly, quite horrible conditions and quite horrible circumstances, subject to poor, below standard living conditions. There's a lot of violence that goes on in our prisons, a lot of drug abuse that goes on in them.
Overcrowding, pathogens, risk of TB, HIV, sexual assault, getting recruited into gangs, all of those things you rightly raise.
Yeah, frankly, the state of our prison systems reflects the state of almost all of our other state-owned enterprises, if you want to call it that, even though it's a wing of government. It's just been neglected. There have been intellectually bereft leadership at the helm for 2 decades to a large extent, and I think that we have neglected the prison systems the same way we've neglected all other aspects of our justice system in South Africa. And given the amount of injustice that takes place in these institutions of justice, do you think that the idea of corporal punishment to get these young men and women out of the system faster would be better? I mean, some of them sit years for 500 Rand because they can't get 500 Rand together to pay bail.
It's a good question, Aidan. You started off by saying you thought it was a crazy idea, and the considerations you then raise show that it's not a crazy idea, because what would you choose if you were to be held in those conditions of terrible overcrowding?
Yes.
We visited Mossel Bay Prison just 3-4 weeks ago, and in the remand section, Mossel Bay Prison is a youth center. So these are people under 21. We also visited the children's section, where there were 16 or 18 youngsters, the youngest of 15. We went to the cell next door, which was one of the most overcrowded cells I've ever seen. Remand young people under 21. I think there were about 80 people in a cell built for 25. The mattresses were ganged up next to each other, sort of squashed in on top of the lockers. They were told not to put it there because it's dangerous. Of course it's dangerous. Exactly. But there's no other space. So when you see that, it's not so crazy. So when the Minister Groenewald, raised this issue, I said it's a good debate because it draws attention to the horrific alternative. But let me tell you, and let me tell our viewers and listeners why I think it's a terrible idea. The debate is good, and I want us to focus on changing the conditions of awaiting trial prisoners, and we'll come to one solution, which we promote in our book in a moment. But it's a crazy idea because the Minister Groenewald, suggested even for those not yet convicted. Now, how can you say to an awaiting trial prisoner, you've not yet been convicted of shoplifting or assault or trespass or possession of drugs, let us give you a whipping?
Yes.
You can't do that. And the minister said awaiting trial prisoners, when I first read this, I said, no, this journalist has got it wrong. Then I went and looked at the parliamentary transcript and it was correct. So the minister was definitely completely wrong to suggest that remandees should be subject to whippings. But what about a short-term prisoner for 3? A friend that I respect a great deal, Gilbert Marcus, SC, whom I'm outing him.
Yes.
Gilbert made a casual remark to me, and I didn't cross-examine him about it, and I don't know if he'll stick with it, but he said that if he had to choose between a short sentence and a whipping, he'd choose a whipping. And I'm repeating what he says because I would too.
And for me.
Yeah.
Personally.
So, but let me tell you why I oppose it, because we are an extremely violent society. And I spoke on KykNet one night and I used some wonderful Afrikaans words, moer en bliksem.
Yes.
And bliksem are semi-polite words and moer is even less semi-polite. But you don't want to moer and bliksem young people because you're going to generate more violence. So what I would say is let us introduce radical reforms to our carceral system rather than resorting to this extremity which simply brutalizes the person subjected it, brutalizes those people who know what they've been through, because a whipping is a terribly degrading and injuring thing. It's not just, 6 of the best at your high school when they still allowed that. So we are generating more violence in an extremely violent society. So let me say one of the reforms that in the book on prisons, Behind Prison Walls, we advocate is a bail fund. And we are at an advanced stage of starting the bail fund. We're recording this towards the end of October. 1st of October, we got a director to promote a pilot phase of the bail fund in the Western Cape. And we're targeting people with bail of less than 1,000 Rand, of whom there are nearly 800.
Yes, it's an insane number.
Yes, and they're here 60 kilometers, 30 kilometers from where we're sitting now, in Johannesburg prison, a.k.a. Sun City, which is how everyone knows it. There are also 700 people with bail of less than 1,000 Rand. And these are for trivial offences, trespass, possession of drugs. So we want to start an independent bail fund, funded independently, not taking justice or prisons or police money at all. We're going to get, and we've already got backers, Millennium Trust, the Bertha Foundation in London, the Claude Leon Foundation. They've all given us seed money to start the bail pilot fund. And if we work this, we can reduce the number of people who are in remand. So there are other things that we can do.
That makes complete sense.
Exactly.
No, that makes complete sense. I thought to myself, it is an interesting idea.
There are other ways, Aidan, that we can decongest our prisons that we advocate in the book. We've got immediate fixes, we've got medium-term fixes, and we've got longer-term fixes.
I've been advocating for quite a while now to have permanent social workers placed inside police stations, that there should be X amount of social workers. I find that one of the biggest problems when it comes to smaller arrests in South Africa, the ones bail below 1,000 rand, is a lot of them are actually social worker issues or issues that should be assigned to a social worker, end up in a police station. And because they don't have the skill to handle the situation, they just go through the easiest and most basic arrest process that they can, and it kind of kicks the can down the road.
Agreed, but of course the question is resources.
Of course, absolutely. I completely understand the resource trade. I think it would be a great, having said that, in terms of resource allocation, I think it would be an immense force multiplier. And skills multiplier within a police station. So I understand there's obviously a resource issue around that. You can't afford everything. But as an idea, there are particular skills that seem to be missing all the time or very often in South African police stations. And I really think that a social worker, permanently deployed social workers in these positions would have a disproportionate effect than another police officer. I know that's going to be very controversial. People aren't going to like that. You were talking about the diseases, things like HIV/AIDS, TB.
TB is a greater danger, but HIV transmission is also a danger in those overcrowded remand cells where sexual abuse is rife. I regret to say.
Do you think as a whole in South Africa we've gone backwards in the fight on HIV/AIDS, given that it was a somewhat neglected issue through the COVID years, given Thabo Mbeki's unfortunate, I would say, views or perspectives on the matter at the time? I don't know if he's changed his opinion. I stopped listening to him quite a while ago, but he obviously did a lot of damage in the fight. And given that there's been so many consecutive issues on the matter, COVID, Mbeki, South Africa's economy tanking for the last decade or two, obviously that feeds into resource issues. Are we going backwards on HIV/AIDS?
Two answers. Definitely not. And I would like to instance my own journey, which I referred to briefly earlier. And the second thing I'd like to say is that we're at risk. We're at risk because of the abrupt, brutal termination of USAID and other funding. On the 25th of January, a lot of AIDS organizations doing immaculate work, life-saving, interventive work, got a message. As soon as Musk and Trump took over, they decided to gut all these programs which were feeding children. The actual drugs, I've been taking ARVs for 28 years.
Yes.
As I said, in 2 weeks' time, it will be 28 years. I think it was about the 7th of November, 1997. I was desperately sick. It saved my life. And that's why I talk about it, because I'm here today.
I've got a cousin who's also something like that, three decades.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. And does your cousin talk about it?
He doesn't. I don't think he would mind speaking about it. He's done other things. They came out here to South Africa. His husband is a Arab man, and they came out to South Africa to circumvent the property rights laws in Israel. And I don't want to mention their names because I'm not sure if it would complicate their lives somehow. But yeah, his husband was Palestinian, he was Israeli. He's into his third decade now on ARVs, more or less. And we had a wedding for them here in Pretoria a number of years ago, and as a result of it being outside of Israel, he now has property rights. So if the one dies, the other can now inherit his flat, his property. Obviously, property is a huge issue in Israel, not just land. Property in itself is one of the most expensive places in the world.
But of course, just to add to what you're saying, it's a very subjective choice. Do you speak about having cancer? Do you speak about having TB? Do you speak about living with AIDS or HIV? But what I want to say, to go back to your question, which is a very interesting and important one, we do risk going back because the actual drugs our country can afford. What we can't easily afford is what the American funds, the dollars, were covering, which is to go into the community to say, have you had a test? We can supply you with with drugs. It's once you're diagnosed, the positive message of ARVs and of destigmatization, all of that has come to a very abrupt standstill. I'm overstating it. I don't know whether it's all come to. So we risk going back. Definitely, we risk higher prevalences. We risk higher incidences. We risk higher mortality and morbidity because of the cutbacks. And I might say that I can speak about this without getting political. It doesn't seem to me that the health ministry, starting with the minister, jumped in quickly enough.
No, they definitely weren't fast enough to...
You said that. So let me say that we've got the world's largest publicly provided antiretroviral program, which is fantastic. I'm very proud.
Yes.
My drugs cost 200 Rand a month, which is fantastic. That's a victory for Zaki Ahmed, who started the Treatment Action Campaign almost 30 years ago in 1998. It's a victory for civic action. The Treatment Action Campaign combined the Council of Churches, the COSATU, people on the ground, the suburbs and the townships, marches. They marched to the drug companies. They marched to the union buildings. So that's a credit. It's also a credit for the courts.
Yes.
Chief Justice Arthur Chaskelson, Deputy Chief Justice, later Chief Justice Pyson Konzo Langa, and a unanimous court told President Mbeki, who you mentioned earlier, you've got to start making these drugs available.
Yes.
Because they looked at all the evidence. So this was an evidence-based assessment by the courts. So I would cite our HIV response as a proud matter, but there's still stigma. There's still reluctance. There's still shame. And that's why I speak about these things, because we need a public voice on them. I respect everyone's right to decide whether to be open or not, but we do need more voices. And working class people speak readily about living with HIV and being on ARVs, but within our elite, the governing elite, there's much more reluctance. So it's a pity that more people aren't speaking out.
That's very interesting. I think in the minds of many people, it's a discussion that's fallen to the wayside. That other, let's say, more sensational topics have unfortunately taken.
Which isn't a bad thing, because what I say to people, I was speaking to a medical class last month at WITS. As I say, it's actually not a big deal. You diagnose someone with HIV, you put them the next day onto ARVs, you check them whether they need second-line therapy, how they're reacting to the drugs, you check them, and once it's found, like me, I have not had a detectable viral load for 28, how much did I say? I must be
28,
consistent.
Yeah.
Do you want me to be consistent?
If you say 27 now, I might think you're lying, Judge.
Exactly.
You have to say 28.
Exactly. Thank you for helping me there. But it's not a big deal. So one wants it to fall off the agenda, but you want people, in letting it fall off the agenda, to be easy about it and to say, I've got HIV, but I'm not going to be, I'm not at risking anyone because I'm intransmissible because I'm on ARVs. That's where we'd like to be, and we might still get there.
I certainly know that you've been an outspoken advocate for a long time, and I think you've obviously done a huge amount of good for South Africa in that space. NHI, and again, I'm not trying to lure you into the realm of politics.
I think you are, but that's good.
Stop me immediately if I go too far.
Or stop myself immediately if I go too far.
Yeah, careful. We don't want to end up on ANN 7 again.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of South Africans that believe that the NHI, obviously it's in an ideal world, it's something that we absolutely want and must have, universal healthcare. It really is a must for a proper functioning democracy. Having said that...
And access to healthcare is promised in the Constitution. So it's a constitutional imperative to expand access to healthcare.
And that's true. It's obviously also like education. It's an economic right. Am I correct in saying that's a second tier right? So it's an alienable right to some extent. So you have the right to healthcare,
access
to healthcare as long as resources provide. So the state can turn around and say, look, there's no clinic for 200 kilometers near your village, but there is technically one in Bloemfontein that you could get to. One would say that is technically access, but for somebody that doesn't have the money, doesn't have the transport, can't even get to a tarred road, there's obviously some practical limitations to that. But in terms of NHI, I believe that we already have what NHI will basically end up being once it's gone to the court. So I think NHI is great in principle, but there's certain aspects that the courts may or may not water down once it goes to this wave of lawsuits or attacks from organizations like Sakelege and the Free Market Foundation. I think they may...
And the medical associations. Who have also brought a constitutional challenge.
I see that there's a number of challenges.
And I won't express any views on that. But what I will say, Aidan, is that it seemed to me that the Minister of Health some years ago had a very good pilot plan. We doing, as I've mentioned a few moments ago, the pilot project for the bail fund in the Western Cape, which is right now getting off the ground. We're very excited about it. We're going to report to Parliament shortly about the bail fund. So a pilot is always a good idea because you see how does it work in practice. What was decided and publicly committed to was that a number of hospitals in the public sector would be selected and upgraded. And once they had been upgraded, there would be an assessment of how you could expand them. And nothing came of that. So that's the only thing I'm going to say. My regret as someone who, from a prison's perspective, has faith in pilot projects, I would say it's a great pity that was never done. So we had that project shelved or abandoned and never pursued. And now we've got the Minister of Health committed to full-scale implementation of the NHI. That's the only issue I would raise. And if you want to ask me any further, I'm going to do, who was the guy who walked off a set recently?
Duck and run.
Yes, someone ducked and ran. Anyway, persist with the NHI and you'll see me duck and run.
Last thing I'll say before we depart to NHI, just a comment. It's not even about NHI, but Professor Adrian Saville from Gibbs, Economist, ran a pilot project. I think it was in Tembisa. In fact, they had about 2 or 3 of them, where the private sector stepped in to say, how can we run an absolute low-cost hospital model? And you won't believe how cheap they got everything by just using, like, for example, they brought in an operations manager and the guy said no lifts. He said 1 floor. He said lift, very expensive. He said insurance and this and that and architects.
And operational costs.
Yeah, for example, no doctors would ever do administration. It sounds like such a simple idea, but for example, there's a person that greets you at the door, says this is how you fill in the form, so that the doctor is only, every 8 or 9 minutes they're turning out a person, and it was just the most incredible.
What I will say, Adrian, is that we have to have change, and let it be said that the business sector, led by Adrian Gore, who founded Discovery, also about 28 years
I know
ago.
him, funny enough, as well. Yeah.
Have you had him on this podcast?
No, I haven't. I know him from cycling. I used to race bicycles a lot when I was much younger, and I still know him from my cycling days. He's also got a holiday house in Plett. I used to work in Plettenberg Bay for a number of years. I don't think he would remember me, but I remember him.
He's very fit.
I just saw him jogging down the road in Athol the other day, so I know that he's obviously still around.
And very fit still. So he's committed to some form of it. So what I will say is that my partner and I are fully paid up members of a full medical insurance scheme, and we pay 15,000 a month, both of us. And it humbles me every time that I go to the doctor, I get access to a very fine GP, Dr. Samantha Fee, she is implementing at her day hospital with public funds that she's raised, she's implementing a broadening scheme. One Saturday a week, she takes anyone. They call it, without condescending or patronizing people, the Domestic Workers Saturday, and people queue up to see her. So what I want to say is that there are ways of broadening healthcare. The one that you've mentioned, I didn't know about, but there are ways, and we should be doing it. I feel quite humbled that you know I can get when I had my stents put in because of what's that thing where you get.
It's I want to say angioplasty.
It's something else. Well. When you think it's heartburn,
angina.
Angina. You see, come to Aidan for medical advice. I had angina and I had 3 stents put in, and you know the cardiologist was extremely. People said to me, "You wouldn't get better care anywhere in the world." That's about 16 to 19% of us.
Yes,
less than 1/5. It can't persist like this. Adrian Gore and other people realize that what we're going to do, Alex van der Heever, who makes some caustic comments from the Wits Business School, caustic but very well informed. He's a well informed commentator. I don't agree with all he says, but you can't ignore Alex van der Heever from the Wits School of Governance.
He agreed to come on the show, and he's ghosted me. If you're watching this, Prof, please get back to us.
Excellent. Alex, please come on to Aidan's and Ben's show. So what I want to say is that the system as it is, which benefits people like me, I would willingly stand in a queue for longer than I have to at the moment were we to expand our healthcare in a just, efficient, responsible and uncorrupt way.
I think we learned a harsh lesson during COVID that public health is personal health. And I think that message came home to a lot of families and households in a way that it never had before. It really woke a lot of people's eyes up that your neighbor's health is in a way your health as well. Not an easy conversation to have given the state of xenophobia in South Africa and things like Operation Dadula and waiting outside clinics to bully people.
Absolutely distressing.
Yes.
And I can say this as a lawyer and as a former judge, I can say that the Constitution, the right of access to healthcare is for everyone. The Constitution doesn't say, except with employment opportunities and except with voting and a very few other places, the Bill of Rights applies to everyone. So I grieve personally when I see that there was this tragic case of a little baby in Alex who had a terrible gastric condition and only needed to be hooked up to a drip and was barred. The mum and the baby were barred at 2 or 3 Alex clinics. The baby died. And this is a death that should not be on any of our consciences.
I've had this conversation with Professor Nkomo from Wits University, who's a great social worker, and in the end, I actually had to turn the comments off on.
Really? Adverse comments?
Oh, I mean, just ask Ben, just the most violent kind of, death threats and threats of
directed
sexual.
to this podcast?
Yeah, both me and her. You know, and her comment was only to the extent to say, no, that, you know, when someone gets to hospital, you have to help them. To say, like, you can't have doctors
and that was inflammatory enough for the doula.
I cannot tell you how much abuse we took on that one. I could go now and find the comments on that. It would be eye-raising.
Stopping.
The one issue that seems to be prevalent in this particular point is that, to a large extent, doctors have actually lost power inside hospitals. They've actually lost a lot of the ability to make a lot of decisions. In my opinion, decisions and choices that should be in the hands of managerial doctors. And what's happened is we've grown because we want to control everything from central points in South Africa as a government policy, we've centralized a lot of the control inside hospital and clinic networks. And we've removed the control from doctors and decision-making power, and we've raised it up into a bloated middle management body. They're very slow to react. They're very clumsy. They don't understand the industry because none of them are doctors. The reason I raise this is because I want to segue into universities, because I find that the exact same thing is also true of universities in South Africa, where to a large extent we've removed the power of academics and tenured professors to make decisions and to have control and to drive free thought. And the centralized control of universities, in my opinion, has been absolutely detrimental to the system. And as a result of that and other issues, many other issues like funding issues, for example, poor economic alignment, I would say that our universities are in an absolute dire state, especially the previously black universities. They called them in South Africa places like Fort Hare.
Historically black.
Historically black universities. Rhodes was also kind of in that grouping. UKZN to some extent, obviously later on in towards the end of the apartheid era. And things are really in a dire state. You know, you were obviously a chancellor, and you've had a lot of experience in universities throughout your lifetime. And I was just wondering what you think of South Africa's universities at the moment. I really see them as places of misery and unhappiness to a large extent. Students are unhappy, the staff are unhappy, graduates can't get jobs, buildings are being burnt down, the politicians have moved in. I remember from my university days, Julius Malema was there every week, and there was always an ANC guy handing out green berets, and they overtake the SRCs. Have our universities lost independence and kind of been captured by political agendas?
I think this goes back to the start of our conversation, Aidan, which is that I think that's alarmist and overstated. I certainly think that the issues of independence and of decision-making are very important. And I think our universities, there are quite a few tertiary higher education institutions, more than 25, I think, if you count all of them. And I would say that there are some real shining spots. Wits, for example, I was chair of council at Wits for 10.5 years, and I'm still proud. Professor Zeblon Vilakazi, who's the head of Wits, is an absolutely outstanding physicist. He's a member of the Royal Society, and he is, from what I hear, and it's second-hand hearsay, he is doing an absolutely outstanding job.
Yes, he's held in high regard.
He's very in very high regard. So I would cite Wits as an example. There's been a change of leadership at Stellenbosch with Professor Duresh Ram-Jugunnath becoming a chancellor after a very controversial and disputed predecessor.
Yes.
And I personally am very glad that Professor Ram-Jugunnath, as a person of integrity and honesty, has taken over there. UCT, there's a new vice chancellor as well, after an extremely difficult and controversial, and many people say damaging incumbency by his predecessor, Professor Bakeng. So it's a complex landscape.
Yes.
But what I want to say is that there is still outstanding research, outstanding scholarship, outstanding training at South Africa's universities. It does differ. Unfortunately, I heard from well-placed sources that there are criminal networks. The Professor Sakela Buhlungu, who is the head of Fort Hare University, is fighting a battle of incredible courage. He's not unblemished. There's been a report in Ground Up of payments not directly implying corruption on his part, but his oversight of people who
could have been maybe
an
better.
Appointment. Yeah. So we don't have an unblemished picture anywhere, maybe at Wits with Professor Vilakazi. But nevertheless, I think there are absolutely outstanding courses, outcomes, exams, researchers, producers of knowledge and teachers in our tertiary sector.
I definitely think that there's still pockets of excellence. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. You certainly go to universities, and each one of the South African universities has at least one or two little pockets where they are excellent. Obviously, Rhodes with things like entomology and ichthyology, they lie in a very unique geographical area where there's a large...
excellent law. I would say that Rhodes and Wits, Stellenbosch UCT, I don't want to leave out UKZN, I'm less informed about them, but there are also excellent law schools at university. So I'm glad you mentioned Rhodes.
Rhodes has suffered Rhodes has suffered a microeconomic failure that has been incredibly detrimental to the universities. So one of the things, because the town around it, there's been no water, no electricity for 20 years, and there's the potholes and huge, 70% unemployment in the area. And as a result of the economic failure, it's been increasingly difficult to attract, for example, a young family. So you might have been able to, 50 years ago, get a very high-powered young academic who's obviously going to rise through the ranks and become one of the top published people in their field. They would move there with their young family, and they would stay there, and they would make a career. And it's become very difficult to attract those people there. People move to the town, and after 2 or 3 years, I'm so tired of the water issue that they...
the university is... stepping in to provide its own water, though you may be right that they can't provide for all their staff and all their students, so they will be affected.
They've done absolutely everything they can from day one, but the scale of the university in relation of the town, it makes it incredibly difficult. Drinking water, no problem, but for sanitation, it's next to impossible. And Rhodes' other problem is just a geographical one, because it's up a hill. It's very difficult. Water's got to be pumped a long way up quite a steep hill for a small town. Whereas if you're in a slightly flatter town, it helps a little bit. That need to get the water to the top has proved to be a huge issue for them. They require, I think, 3 pumps to do it, and if one's failed...
serious consequences.
It really has.
Can one just say, the point you're making, I've got friends and colleagues who live in Makanda, formerly known as Grahamstown, and it's a tragedy that need never have occurred.
Agreed.
There's been gross mismanagement, gross corruption at local government level, and they fight every attempt to put the town under administration. There have been real efforts to say, let's fix the potholes, let's fix the water, let's fix finance.
The name escapes me, but there was a league of professors. It was literally the league of like professors and academics, and they came along, and it was a hit list of, it was like professors of everything. There was a guy to cover absolutely everything, and they said, we will work for free for 2 years, and we'll do X, and we won't get involved. And the ANC managed to push them out.
I don't know about the ANC's role, but let me tell you what I read, which is that they convened a meeting. I don't know if it's the same group, but a group of experts who were going to fix the finances, and the mayoral committee member for finance agreed to come and then didn't pitch up. So I read this. I'm not vouching for it personally, but that's the tragedy. And the point I want to make generally is that we have the resources. We have the young people. I was privileged as a Constitutional Court judge. The big deal in the Constitutional Court for me, I had some wonderful colleagues, admirable colleagues who are friends and were friends and became friends. But the big deal for me was the law clerks. And I had the privilege of having exposure to about 30 over 11 years. And then there were, on top of that, there were the foreign law clerk volunteers. And most of my clerks were black, most of them were women. And I would put those 30 law clerks in charge of the whole country. They were outstanding people of integrity, determination, and capacity for very hard work. And that's the point about our country. We have a generation of young people, and you and your producer Ben, who's standing there, are part of that generation of people in their 20s and 30s with behind them more outstanding people coming up. It's my generation. I'm 72. I'm turning 73 in a few months' time, early next year. It's my generation that's screwed up, honestly. And last time I said this, I also got, it was reported in the newspaper, I also got very angry comments,
Yeah.
Don't say that I screwed up, say that you screwed up. But the point is that generationally, we have failed South Africa. And I think that we can do better. We have the resources, we have the people, we have the will. We need to implement.
It's a very unpopular thing, but I've always said something kind of similar, that we've missed a generation and maybe another half a generation. But if we're very careful and we start focusing on people that are in grade 1 now, and the generation that comes up behind them, we can rescue that generation, that they won't live the same failures of the same generation and a half. Again, I know that's not going to be popular with everyone. People say
one must start somewhere. One must start with prisons. You asked me at the outset, and you spoke about the dysfunction in prisons being symptomatic of a wider dysfunction. I'd agree with that, but I would caution that, in my experience, the prison department, while suffering from corruption, a minority of personnel, while suffering from dysfunction, from misallocation of resources, your social work idea earlier in this conversation, would not be impossible if there were a reallocation of resources. So let me say that the prisons department, to my surprise, for example, when COVID came, there were stories of rampant COVID in North America, in Central America, in South America, where COVID rushed through the prison system. We didn't have it in South Africa because they intervened effectively. To its credit, the prison system, we didn't have mass outbreak of COVID, and that impressed me. Another healthcare aspect. Every time I go into a prison, we ask about TB, we ask about HIV, we ask about blood pressure, we ask about other communicable and non-communicable diseases. No prison that I've visited, and I've visited many in the last 6 years, doesn't have effective ARVs. The time we visited Mossel Bay a few weeks ago, we also visited Knysna, and the nurse in charge did say that the turnover in Remondes made it difficult to screen everyone.
Yes.
But there's ARV provision in prisons, and that's a credit to our capacity. So I would not tar prisons with exactly the same brush. The problem with prisons is the systemic problem of over-incarceration, which is created by Parliament, not by the prison system.
I completely agree with that. The justice system in South Africa is very great at creating bottlenecks. So what we've seen, for example, is they have these massive operations on Friday nights, and they look brilliant for the media. And what happens, you get a detective who was overloaded. He had 200 cases on Friday. And he could only get around to 20% of them at most, because you can get around to 200 cases. And then they have Operation XYZ. It comes through their area. You have a couple of MPs, and they're out doing their show. Monday morning's got 400 dockets. And it's just another example of the way that we create bottlenecks in the system by attacking certain aspects of the optics of the system. So instead of attacking the bottleneck mechanism, we go after the optics to make it look better. And we completely drop the ball. And I just see that everywhere. We need an operations manager for our justice system. We are unfortunately running out of time. We'll never get around to all of the questions, so I'll just take one or two parting shots. And now I'm going to actively try and lure you into the realm of politics, because there's no way I can avoid this question. When I started with Ben Winks, a longtime friend of Ben and I, coincidentally,
and an excellent counsel, by the way.
He is.
He was a law clerk when I was there, and he's one of the people that I would mention as having integrity and being committed to public interest work. And we've got many people like that in our country.
He's been like that since he was a child, if I can tell you. And if I can tell you, his whole broader family are like that. The Winks, as a clan,
is that so?
Are like that.
Good to hear.
Yeah, he's got an older brother, George. If you ever have the time, he's a craftsman. He lives in the UK. He makes the most unbelievable things like benches and tables and stuff like that. World class. Not affordable on the rand. But yeah, the Winks, what a family. But he was adamant that the South African justice system at the time, this was going on nearly 2 years ago, that the courts were not captured, that the courts remained free and independent.
Yeah.
And in the last year or two, with all the revelations that are coming out, especially now at the Madlanga Commission, there's been one or two quite clear examples of lower courts, high courts and magistrates courts where clearly there are people inside the courts that have been captured and have been bought. You know, they're operating in unison with criminal networks like Cat McClellan's syndicate. Yeah. And I would just like to ask, would you be as vehement that the courts still remain free and independent as Ben Winks would? Because my opinion's shifted in that time.
Yeah. Yes. Again, it's not a simple answer, because there's no doubt that there have been magistrates who've taken bribes. And Judges Matter, which is an outstanding unit at UCT, law school. We were talking about outstanding law school. Bigizeli Benjamin was on television over the weekend saying that there's only been a small proportion of the complaints about magistrates relate to corruption, but they have been followed up, which doesn't mean that there are more. I would vouch for almost all my colleagues. My colleague, Judge Aubrey Ledwaba, the Deputy Judge President in Gauteng, has been fingered by double hearsay. It's a witness who says that he heard that there was X amount of money, 2.5 million, made aside for the prosecutor or the judge. So in the end, the controversial figure gets bail, and that is a smear. Let us see the evidence before we say. The news representation said that the judge has been, well, it's hearsay evidence, and it was an ambiguous statement the witness heard. So I'm glad that Judge Ledwaba is fighting this, and I'd obviously like to see him come out vindicated, but we'll see if there's evidence. I hope it comes out. But my sense at the moment is that he is likely to vindicate himself, but what an awful position to be in.
I certainly think that unscrupulous lawyers take advantage of problems like that in the system, where there is some kind of doubt in the system, and what they do is they publicly leverage the doubt, and I think that does fall to the advantage of criminals in the end.
And of course, one has to distinguish between the prosecution, between the magistrates' courts and the high courts.
Yes.
There was an acquittal of a number of people, including, I think, Mr. Koko from Eskom, by a magistrate who was alleged to have had an interest in one of the companies involved. And that's being followed up. I would like to hear what happened to that magistrate who summarily acquitted. According to the NPA, the acquittal was grossly irregular. And Judge Hlophe, when he was still a judge, did a similar thing, and that was reversed on appeal laboriously. And Judge Nathan Ponnen in the SCA, who presided and wrote the judgment, was absolutely scathing about Judge Hlophe's judgment. And the SCA judgment, the appellate judgment, made it almost impossible to conclude that Judge Hlophe had honestly applied himself to that acquittal. So there are spots and stains, but the High Court system I would personally vouch for, subject to contrary proof.
I would. The one thing that I will say is that the working conditions of magistrates in the lower courts, in my opinion, is
appalling.
Yeah.
And the second thing I'd say, and I've said this on Ground Up, is that magistrates should be honoured for the work they do. They do most of the hard work in the system. They should be called district court judges and regional court judges. not magistrates, which is a historical term that we can discard, and they should be paid better.
Yes, they're not compensated.
Paid much less than judges. The disparity is unconscionable. Anything else controversial that you want to ask me, Aidan?
No. The one thing we can definitely agree on is that they paid way below market rate. So they were obviously unhappy with their remuneration packages going back a couple of months ago. And I looked into it, and to have magistrates earning what junior, so you have a person that's been on the bench 20 years, they're still in a magistrate's position. They haven't been able to move up. Very good at what they're doing. They're earning like what the most junior counsel sometimes honest
or less.
Yes. And not only that, but you go into these courts, Randburg Magistrates Court, you can go in there on any given day. There's no electricity, there's no water, there's the clerk is sick, not the fault of the clerk, but how do you expect the magistrate to operate when they get there that day and there's no assigned clerk for them? And they're sharing a clerk between two
the
courts.
Conditions are very difficult, and the magistrates do the hardest work.
Yeah,
at the most exposure.
They're at the coalface. They for me are at the coalface. Magistrates, police, school teachers, and nurses, and one or two other members of
social workers.
And social workers. They are the people that deal with the nitty gritty, the really nasty, horrible stuff in society. Magistrates and teachers grossly underpaid and not well looked after.
But you had a further controversial question.
We're getting to it. I guess we're getting to it now. There are some commentators that say South Africa is now a mafia state, and that they define South Africa being a mafia state on the principle that they can no longer define the state apart from mafia enterprises. And in my mind, I can clearly define the state apart from these criminal networks, but I can understand why many, many South Africans can no longer tell them apart. Do you think South Africa is a mafia state, or do you think, again, that that's very alarmist and sensational? Sensationalist.
Yeah, both are good. I would say that we're at high risk. I would certainly say that criminal syndicates stretch right into President Ramaphosa's cabinet. And I think the evidence is there of people who are heavily soiled with shady transactions, shady receipts, shady. I think it's like the rest of our country. There are honest people, hardworking, honest people committed to the public interest who are in the cabinet. But I would say that we are at risk of that happening. I'm not a political commentator, but I'm speaking about what I've read, what I've seen. I would say that we are at risk.
I definitely think that there are elements of criminality that are so deeply entrenched in South Africa's political system that it could be... It would almost take the entire death of the ANC and some other political parties, or certainly generations of leaders within those political parties, in order to even have a hope of weeding out the system, especially given the low standing, in my opinion, of our investigative and prosecutorial authorities. They just aren't at the state yet where they can take on very big, very complex crimes. They appear to be doing a Rudy Giuliani a la 1990 New York, where they go for the minnow and then the medium-sized fish and then the herring, and eventually they're going to go after the big shark. But we seem to be so far away from that at the moment that I think that South Africa is already a mafia state, and that we're going to just see the...
I dearly hope you're wrong, because those generations that you mentioned earlier deserve better, and I think we can give them better. And I think with leadership, with decisive leadership, which I will comment politically here, I'm afraid we don't have enough of. With decisive, competent leadership, we can deal with all those things, because leadership has knock-on effects within an entire organization. And if someone, the big risk we run is that someone will emerge as a false leader. It's happened in Europe, in Hungary, and it's happened in America. I think that we're at risk of it's happening here. Maybe not with the current crop of people who are in political leadership and political parties, but I think the public is thirsting for that leadership, and unless we get competent, principled leadership of integrity soon, we're going to be at risk.
On the flip side of my comment, because it was quite negative, I will say that I do think, even though we are a mafia state, that our democratic processes are still very vibrant. And as a result, I'm very optimistic that in the next decade or two, we are going to see these fresh, young leaders emerge. People like Makone Maja, Pumlani Majozi, Guhle Maseko, these young people, they're going to rise up into positions of leadership. They just need another decade or two to cook. They're still in their mid-20s
I think that one must say, Aidan, that the civil society sector is very strong. It's one of the legacies of apartheid, that under apartheid you had a strong union movement, you had strong educational organizations, activist organizations. The most prominent post-apartheid activist organization was the Treatment Action Campaign, which succeeded. So we can still mobilize. There's been mobilization of the public in other countries, and I believe that with our civil society organizations, we can mobilize the public for the good.
I think
not for populism.
I definitely agree with you, and I think that our robust democratic system is going to deliver these things more often and in bigger ways than it's done before. I'm not one of those people. I think that we're going to beat the mafia state's capture, and I think that our democratic processes and principles are just world-class, really, really strong. We have a vibrant and, again, robust, strong democracy in South Africa in terms of a household principle, like households in South Africa at a household level, believe in democracy and, just have very, very high hopes.
Certainly the freedom of the media.
Yes, absolutely.
Subject to the baneful phenomena that you've mentioned on social media, and freedom of expression are enormously important. We have greater freedom of expression in South Africa than in 2/3 of the rest of the world. The whole of Russia, the whole of China, most of Africa. We have Cameroon, Uganda, terrible inhibitions of freedom of expression. People are free to say what they like and free to organize here. So we must muster our response and our assertion and our implementation of constitutional rights, and we have to muster that civil society power, which does already exist and can be mobilized and strengthened.
I think that it's actually part of a healthy, vibrant and robust democracy to have these. I'm not a libertarian, but I think free speech should be very, very broadly and widely tolerated to the point where if somebody believes that I should be killed because of my race and creed, as long as they're not going to try it, and I know that's very controversial in South Africa, and that's why I also think guys like Julius Malema and the radical elements in South African politics are also part of a healthy, robust, vibrant conversation, part of a healthy, robust, vibrant democracy. And to get rid of players like that would actually be detrimental to the future well-being of the country. I know not everybody's going to agree with that. I'll leave people to roast me in the comments section. The last thing that we'll go through today will just to ask you if you have any comments, thoughts, or projections on the 2026 and 2029 elections going forward. I know you don't like to comment on the political space, but if there's anything that you think may be relevant court cases or legal principles that you may think that might impact the elections coming up, or if you have nothing.
I would simply say that it's going to be an incredible testing time for the Electoral Commission, which people still know popularly as the Independent Electoral IEC, but it's the Electoral Commission statutorily and constitutionally.
Oh, is that okay?
I think it's.
I always call it IEC. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's like Sun City.
Yeah.
So I say it's going to be incredibly important for it to remain independent, to secure access to voting and to get people to vote. That's been the major phenomenon. Get people to vote, get out the vote and get people to vote in confidence and in sanctity.
Yeah, our voter turnout's terrible. Coincidentally, that's been to the benefit of the Democratic Alliance, not to many other parties, but the DA certainly benefited from the low voter turnout. I love Dr. Franz Cronier, by the way. We've come to the end of our show, and you've been very kind with your time. Is there anything that we haven't covered here today that you think is a very important message for South Africa, final message for the interview that you'd like people to know, just a sound bite that we can put out there?
I would say that we have more power than we think, South Africans, individual South Africans, organizationally, individually, and we must not despair, and the worst thing that we can do is to sit back and grumble. Every time that we grumble, we can change that energy into positive energy by getting involved. There are many ways of getting involved, either do-good organizations or political activism or personal helping. Wealth sharing is an important part. We have such a disparity of wealth distribution. There's something that every one of us can do every day in action, in sharing, in commitment, and in energizing our response to many of the dilemmas that we are in and improve them for the better.
That's a beautiful soundbite and a great way to end off a fantastic conversation with, quite frankly, one of South Africa's most incredible wise elders, if you mind me using that phrase. There's just not too many people like you with such a broad depth of experience. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to your next book and whatever comes next from you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time.